Well, ministerial screening commences as Nigerians await economic team. Everybody's waiting to see who becomes minister of what. As we move on, the International Monetary Fund has raised the growth forecast of Nigeria's economy for the 2019 fiscal year by 0.3% to 2.3%. The Debt Management Office lists the federal government of Nigeria's second 100 billion naira 7-year sukuk bond on the Nigerian Stock Exchange. We look at what to expect from the new ministers and, of course, the resolutions, the outcome of the Monetary Policy Committee meeting of the Central Bank of Nigeria. Retention of all rates, that's our focus for the day. Welcome to the show. The International Monetary Fund has raised the growth forecast of Nigeria's economy for 2019 fiscal year by 0.3% to 2.3%. It disclosed this in its July update on the World Bank outlook with the theme, sluggish global growth, call for supportive policies. The fund in its January report had revised the country's gross domestic product projection down to 2%. IMF also stated that growth was projected to improve between 2019 and 2020. The Monetary Policy Committee has left key lending rates at 13.5%, cash reserve requirements at 22.5%, and liquidity ratio at 30%. The committee says holding rates steady is in the best economic interest following its recent directive to banks on lending 60% of deposits to the rail sector. Lara Folayan reports.
The Monetary Policy Committee of the Central Bank of Nigeria arriving from its two-day meeting where members voted to retain existing monetary policy stance, a decision coming against the background of happenings in the external sector and moderating inflation, which would not allow for tightening. Loosening, on the other hand, could improve money supply and help domestic production, but could lead to excess liquidity.
The committee decided unanimously by a vote of all members present to retain monetary policy rate at 13.5% and hold all other policy parameters constant. Decision was informed by the conviction of members that key macroeconomic indicators are trending in the right direction and because of the lag in the effect of policy actions on output.
The balance in the country's foreign reserves is $44.8 billion. The committee wants the authorities to improve on infrastructure and revive moribund industries for the African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement to be beneficial. The Apex Bank shed light on plans to include milk importation on its forex restriction list to improve local production. It as well wants the authorities to expand the tax revenue base.
The committee enjoined the management of the bank to de-risk the financial markets via the development of a reliable credit scoring system similar to what applies in the advanced countries, as this will encourage deposit money banks to safely grow their credit portfolios. The MPC called on the fiscal authorities to expedite action on expanding the tax base of the economy to improve government revenue and stem the growth in public borrowing. It further urged the fiscal authorities to build fiscal buffers to avert macroeconomic downturn in the event of a decline in oil prices.
The Monetary Policy Committee left rates unchanged at its last meeting in May on considerations that tightening was bad for lending as economic growth was still fragile, while loosening would have impacted inflation negatively. Lara Folayan, TVC News, Abuja.
The Central Bank of Nigeria said it will begin a monthly review of deposit money banks' loans to deposit ratios from September as part of efforts to increase lending and stimulate economic growth. The CBN Governor, Godwin Emefiele, disclosed this in Abuja at a press briefing on the outcome of the Monetary Policy Committee meeting. The loan deposit ratio is a ratio between the bank's total loans and total deposits, and it is used to calculate a lending institution's ability to cover withdrawals made by its customers. Speaking on the plan to restrict foreign exchange for milk importation, Emefiele says this was born out of the need to encourage local production of the product as well as support the dairy value chain.
The reports either quoting me or or quoting somebody in central bank saying that there are attempts to restrict effects on the importation of milk into the country is correct. It's very correct because we believe that milk is one of those products that can be produced in Nigeria today. And you all must have heard me at different fora ask questions that
CBN governor there. Well, the Central Bank of Nigeria decided unanimously to keep the benchmark interest rate steady at 14%. That was on January 22nd, 2019. The concerns raised by the monetary policy at this time was inflationary pressure in the first half of the year amidst an increase in spending ahead of the general elections and disruptions caused by flooding. The central bank also decided to cut its benchmark interest rate by 50 basis points to 13.5% on March 26, 2019, mainly to stimulate the economy. The decision surprised markets that had expected the rates to remain steady at 14%. The move marked the first rate cut since November 2015. The central bank again left its benchmark interest rate steady at 13.5% on May 21, 2019, as widely expected, following a surprise 0.5 percentage points cut at the previous meeting. Policymakers mentioned at the time that growth remains fragile as the economy expanded only 2.01% in Q1 of 2019 compared to 2.38% in the prior quarter, amidst a slump in the country's oil sector. Again, the Apex Bank retained monetary rate at 13.5% at its meeting held Monday and Tuesday this month, July, as widely expected, as inflation rate remained well above the bank's target range of 6 to 9%, and GDP growth remained subdued. The bank's governor, Godwin Emefiele, said the Apex Bank is not in a hurry to bring interest rates down, but will start reviving bank loans to deposit ratio after September 30th, aiming to increase lending and stimulate growth. In February 2019, the annual inflation edged down from 11.3% to 11.3% from 11.4% in January. The headline inflation rate increased to 11.37% in April from 11.25% in March. Nigeria's consumer price index dropped to 11.22% year-on-year in June 2019 from 11.40% in May. The figures was the lowest of inflation rates since July 2018, as prices rose at a softer pace for almost all categories. Now, the current rate is still above central bank's target range of 6 to 9%. Well, a partner with PricewaterhouseCoopers, Taiwo Oyedele, is also the head tax. He joins me now to speak more on all of this. Thank you very much for joining us, Mr. Taiwo.
My pleasure.
Let's start with the screening.
Yes.
It's on. That's the burning one now. Well, what are your expectations from this new? Well, we have some that are returning for the new entrants and all of that. What are your expectations, basically, as we need to kickstart this economy fast?
Yeah, I think from the list, it's a good mix of people who have been there before, plus new people who are being added. And also another way of looking at it is a good combination of technocrats and politicians, which is, I think, is necessary. The diversity, it's okay, but can be better in terms of women and youth. But if you look beyond that, my concern is one, I hope that we get to a point very quickly when we nominate people for ministerial positions and we indicate the portfolio they will manage. I still don't understand how we do it in Nigeria. So you're going for a job interview. The interviewers don't know which role you're going to play. You that you are going for the interview, you don't know the role you're going to play. You then end up sometimes that an individual has a good CV and they look okay, but you're putting a round peg in a square hole. If you judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree, it will live the rest of its life thinking that it was dumb. So you need to let people play to their strengths, and while we're doing the screening, we should ask questions based on the portfolio intended for them. That for me is still a big disappointment. The list did not come out on time. About 2
That
months
means
from
54 days.
54 days from when Mr. President was inaugurated, better than 6 months the last time. But if you look at it from when the election results were announced, this is still about 5 months, which is too long, but better late than never. We have a lot of urgent issues now where we need the cabinet not only to be on ground, but they need to run like there's no tomorrow with speed.
Let's look at this running now. We need to run, like we've said. What should be what are the quick fixes? We need to fix some things as fast as possible, policies and all of that in the world of business. What are your thoughts?
So the economy in general, so we currently don't have a full economic team. So you have the central bank who is always there and they're trying to do their best, but we're missing that huge gap in the area of the fiscal aspect of the economy. And of course, you don't have things to deal with critical issues such as the Africa Continental Free Trade Area. The agreement has been signed and there is a provision under the treaty for Council of Ministers where you expect the Minister for Trade, Investment and Industry to participate in the implementation. Now, the fact that we do not have ministers in place means that Nigeria is creating a gap, and for us to be able to quickly lead the implementation of that free trade area, we need to have the complement of the cabinet. And it's not only about trade and FTA. Fiscal authorities need to also play their role. In the case of the Ministry of Finance, you have a lot of other issues around employment generation, labor, issues of minimum wage are still there, they haven't been resolved. So we just don't have the time to waste. A sense of urgency, the team should come together very quickly. They need to have a vision and a strategy they're all working towards, and then get to work like yesterday.
So I was also talking to some. Okay, I hear the screening has continued now in the Senate. They're back there now, and Rotimi Amechi is there now. Let's look at transport. Let's look at power before we now look at petroleum industry. I think these are very sensitive areas. There was recently another agreement with Siemens to actually improve power. So what do you think needs to be done in all of these sectors? Without power, we cannot really achieve industrialize this economy.
Yes, we can continue to make small incremental progress, like you sign an agreement to do 10,000 megawatts, 20,000 megawatts. I would say it's a baby step, but it doesn't solve Nigeria's problem because ultimately, maybe Nigeria needs about 250,000 megawatts. We need to get to a point that from a policy point of view, we address the issues in that sector, market reflective pricing of tariff, issues to do with the value chain, who plays there in government intervention, how do you regulate without restricting what the market players can do, issues to do with technical capability, financing is a big issue, debt that are not being paid. Now, if you deal with all these issues holistically, you can leave the rest. The private sector will drive electricity, even transportation. A lot of it can be done and driven by the private sector. You see, for example, the central bank governor announced out of the outcome of the MPC meeting that they're going to limit access to forex for importation of milk. Now, I think this is more like the CBN trying to play the role of the fiscal authorities. Because it's not as easy as saying we restrict access to FX and then you can start producing milk locally. We are not asking the question of why is it that we are not currently producing milk locally. If it's commercially viable, people will do it. And this is also, in my view, contradictory to what we need to do under the Continental Free Trade Area. Once you ban access to FX, you make the product more expensive, you increase the possibility for smuggling, and government also loses revenue. And people who need to consume milk, like, it's good for children growing up, for their well-being. Without that, you're going to create the gap between the rich and the poor because it becomes more expensive and the rich people can afford it. Their kids do better in school, and then the poor people can't afford it because it's more expensive. We need to make provision for local substitute in a way that is market effective and is commercially viable before you place all those restrictions like the CBN is trying to do.
Okay, I think we have feeds from Abuja now, live pictures from Abuja now. We are connecting to Abuja now to hear what's actually happening there. I can see Rotimi Mechi there. That's the past Minister of Transportation.
Thank you, Mr. President. In your position as the chair, my name is Naya Baribe. I represent Abia South, and I'm the minority leader. Mr. President, let me say that I will have some discussion with you after. But I have also had a discussion with the Rivers Caucus, and they claim that they don't have a discussion with me. So I don't know whether you can let a member of the Rivers State Caucus confirm or not whether I had a discussion with them.
You can sit down, Minority Leader. I want to respond to that before I take any point of order. This policy was adopted consciously and overwhelmingly, and I will advise us that we don't shift the goalpost. We stick with it, and I know that maybe few of us may have reservation, but this is a democracy. So, Minority Leader, I want to believe that this Senate will not change that policy. We are going to stick with it to the end. And I want to advise that if you have anything to say, to convey the general idea of what you should ordinarily say, I'll advise that you do so. Point of order, Senator Mohamed Goji.
Mr. President, point order 3. 2. Mr. Commissioner, I would like to read it. 3.2. Nomination of senators to serve as presiding officers and appointments of principal officers and other officers of the Senate or on any parliamentary delegation shall be in accordance.
All right, there, you're just watching live pictures there, the floor of the Senate. We'll keep a tab on that as discussions also go on here. Expectations are really high. I still have Mr. Taiwo Oyedele here in the studio. Now, we talked about 54 days before this list came out, and finally screening started. And in 2015, we waited for 6 months. Let's look at the economic implications of this delay, how it has affected investors' confidence, stock market, and all of that.
Yeah, so usually I think sometimes politicians are not mindful of the fact that they have very limited time. So if you have 4 years to turn an economy around and deal with very critical and fundamental issues like unemployment, like infrastructure, you can't afford to waste just 1 day. So I still don't understand again why things like this take us so long. It shouldn't be complicated to make a list of ministers. And then, but at least it's good that from the national, yeah, I know there are interests, but, you know, these are things you already know. It's not your first term. You know, you have the experience. Election results were out since like 4 or 5 months ago. But the good thing is that the National Assembly, I like the way that they took this matter very seriously. One, there will be no bow and go. Number 2 is they've suspended their recess and they're trying to do this screening. So I commend the National Assembly for that. So hopefully by end of today or tomorrow, we're done with the list and we can now get into the business of running the economy. So I think as a matter of priority, the new cabinet has to carry out an assessment of where we are, especially from the economic point of view. We have the ERGP. We need to reassess it. Is ERGP still fit for purpose? Do we need to modify and tweak it? Like Bill Gates told us that in terms of our focus, in terms of human capital development, is not good enough. And that will be mostly education and health, but also social intervention. So we need to urgently look at those areas and develop a plan with milestones. What is it that we're going to achieve in 100 days, in 6 months, in 1 year, 2 years, and consistently engage with Nigerians both ways. Give an update to Nigerians about the progress you're making and get the input from Nigerians about what you need to do next. We shouldn't develop policies before we engage. We should engage before we develop those policies. So that's really critical for me. I know some states also haven't even constituted their own cabinet. Most time we focus only on the federal government, but our lives are impacted by all levels of government. Sometimes impacted more by state and local government than the federal government. So my appeal would be to all our political leaders to recognize the sense of urgency in trying to address this project in Nigeria, especially in the area of unemployment. We're having a lot of security challenges, and the bulk of this is to do with very young, agile, energetic, creative people who have no hope in the project Nigeria. So they're picking up whatever comes their way, from Yahoo to herdsmen in whatever form and shapes, to Boko Haram. And the more insecurity you have, the less likely that you attract both domestic and foreign investment. The less investments you attract, the more unemployment you create. The more unemployment, the more insecurity. So we need to break that cycle urgently. And I'm hoping that Mr. President has the will and the ability to do that very quickly.
All right, Mr. You already talked about ERGP, which I was noting down. Let us to talk more about that. Finally, let's look at whoever becomes the Minister of Budget and National Planning. We've had issues with our budget circle not following due process. Well, that's the way it's been here. We don't follow the January to December circle, and the President is saying we have to change this. How well do you see this playing out?
Yeah, I think trying to change the budget cycle to align with Nigeria's fiscal calendar is brilliant. But I don't think that is the biggest problem we have. Whenever the budget is passed, you should implement it. So the biggest thing is with the implementation of the budget. But even before the implementation, it's also ensuring that you're able to capture the issues that are most important to Nigerians in that budget, especially in terms of priority areas. Thank God the elections are over. Sometimes you see things in the budget and you just know this is for politics, not really that this is the best thing for Nigeria at this time. So given that we're where we are now after the elections, I would expect the budget process to be more robust. Let's present it to the National Assembly on time. Let's implement it 100% if possible, especially issues to do with policies and capital projects, not just recurrent expenditure. We need to raise the amount of tax revenue without raising tax rates and creating new taxes. We don't need new taxes, we just need new taxpayers. And once you increase the size of treasury in terms of revenue, it will reduce the pressure that we have currently in using more than half of government revenue to service our debt. That is not sustainable. It makes it look like a country that is heading towards bankruptcy. God forbid.
We shouldn't do that. Mr. Tawo, I must thank you so much, Head Tax and Corporate Advisory Services, PricewaterhouseCoopers. Thank you very much. And a partner, I know how it's all goes
My
together.
pleasure.
Thank you so much for joining us
Thank
and
you for
talking
having me.
extensively about what we should expect from our new ministers at the time when they will be confirmed. Thank you again for your time.
Thank you for having me.
Well, that's our show, but of course, we'll leave you and stay with the coverage of the ministerial screening live from Abuja, and my colleague will take it up from there. Thank you for watching.